All right, folks, let's go ahead and get this started. Welcome, everybody, to the Fall Debate Night Showcase. This is the showcase for the Diablo Valley College speech and debate team, and this is debate night where you're going to see two debates.
All right, folks, let's go ahead and get...
Sorry, I heard my own YouTube stream starting to go off in the background there, so I had to close it real quick. But welcome, everybody. Glad you're here. My name is Blake Longfellow, and I am the co-director of forensics at Diablo Valley College. Forensics is just a fancy word for speech and debate. So basically that means I am one of the head coaches for the speech and debate team. And boy, do we have a heck of a speech and debate team here, folks. We are the current state champions for community colleges. In 2021, DVC won our first ever state championship for community colleges, and we're the second place community college team in the entire nation. So we have a really, really strong team here, but don't let that intimidate you. Almost everybody that is a part of this team and that you'll see here tonight on stage started doing speech and debate in community college. Very few people come in with any experience. So everyone is welcome to join the speech and debate team, and you especially are encouraged to join us in the spring or next year, or if you're looking to transfer, to join the speech and debate team at the school you're transferring to. And there's a lot of reasons you would do that. The first main reason is that it looks great on college applications. So wherever it is that you're hoping to transfer in the spring, next year, or beyond, speech and debate's going to look great on your college admissions and college applications, and it will help you boost your GPA and earn units for transfer faster, because we are a class. The class is called Communication Studies 163 Forensics. And so by registering for that class, you can earn up to 4 units a semester, and you can even take the class 4 times for a total of 16 units. So earn a lot of school credit, boost your GPA, transfer faster, and it looks awesome on your college applications. Another good reason to join the team is to make friends. I went to community college. I know how easy it is to come and go from classes, especially with this online environment, and never really get to meet people. But with the speech and debate team, we have about 30 to 50 people on the team every year. And that's a built-in group of people at DVC for you to become friends with, to network with, and hopefully make friends for life. I myself am best friends with people that I competed with in speech and debate, and I think most coaches would tell you the same. And the DVC team is a really fun group of people. So you're going to meet a couple of them tonight, as well as a few of the coaches. And that's one of the big reasons to join the team, is to make friends and to network with people at other schools. We compete against schools from all across the country. And so there's opportunities to meet students from other schools, to meet coaches from other schools that you might want to transfer to, earn scholarships. And that leads us to our third big reason, is scholarships. Multiple members of the speech and debate team from last year that won the state championship now have full ride scholarships at universities, continuing to compete in speech and debate. So there's a lot of opportunity there for you, and we hope that you will join us. The last thing I want to say before we start to get tonight's event going is that a lot of people don't realize that there are 15 different events in speech and debate, and only 3 of those 15 are debate. So there's a whole world of speech and debate that isn't even debating, it's more speaking. So whether you would like to work on your presentation skills with a persuasive speech, or you want to get better at speaking on your feet and coming up with a speech on the fly, we have events for that. And then we even have events that are more like competitive acting. So say you're coming from the theater world or dance or whatever it is, and you want to be more performative, we have events like that that are more acting based. And that's where famous actors like Denzel Washington, Zac Efron, James Dean, all of them came out of the speech side. But tonight it is about debate. And we have 2 debates ready for you. The first is going to be IPDA debate, a little bit shorter one. And the second one is parliamentary debate, a little bit longer one. And so to get that started, I want to introduce our next speaker, which is one of our coaches for the debate team. Their name is Syerson. He's going to come on here in just a minute. And Syerson was a former member of the DVC speech and debate team and has been coaching with us for almost 10 years now, since those days, and has led the DVC team to our most prolific run in school history. And so to tell you a little bit more about the debates that you'll see tonight and the competitors that you're going to get to watch debate, I'll pass it over to Syerson.
Thanks, Blake. That's very kind of you. Like Blake said, hello, I'm Sasan Kasravi. I'm one of our debate coaches here at DVC. Blake mentioned how great we've been doing, but I just want to emphasize we have a really good speech and debate team. Our debate team, especially last year, found a lot of success, and this year has continued that success. So if you want to join, do it and join and learn how to do all of these things. The first debate that you're going to watch is IPDA. It's a one-on-one format of debate. And the idea here is that it's more accessible to the general public. You don't need a lot of like technical knowledge about debate as like its own nuanced sport with its own sort of rules and whatever. It's just kind of what everyone imagines debate is, where you have a topic that is generally common knowledge, and there is one person saying that the thing that the resolution says is true. The other side says that the thing that the resolution says is not true. That resolution for this practice debate, well, demonstration debate, I should say, is Facebook does more harm than Twitter. I don't know very much about that. So here to tell me about it is our affirmative speaker, who is Richa Prabhakar. Richa is in her second year on our team and has had tremendous success in that time. Last year, Richa was national champion in a debate for community college competitors. So an excellent competitor. And debating against her on the negation side of this topic is Tristan Keene. Tristan is also in her second year of debate and was champion in several events, I think, last year, many of which were debate related. And I'll just keep stalling until we get the camera situation with Tristan figured out. So what you're going to be seeing is Richa is going to come up and she's going to present a case for why Facebook does more harm than Twitter. I don't know what she's going to say. It could be social harm. It could be actual physical harm with people getting hurt. It could be environmental harm. A lot of that has to do with how the debaters interpret the topic. Tristan is going to be negating that, which doesn't necessarily mean that she is going to argue that Twitter is worse, though that is certainly a large portion of what she's probably going to talk about. But she is also allowed to argue that there's no difference between the two, that they're both equally harmful. That's another way of demonstrating that one is not worse than the other. Okay, there she is. So I'll step out of the way. Richa, whenever you are ready, we can get started.
Thank you so much, Sasan. First off, I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight. This is really exciting. My name is Richa Prabhakar, and I stand in firm affirmation of the resolution that we will be debating today. Facebook does more harm than Twitter. Today's debate, I'll explain why Facebook does more harm than Twitter for three main reasons. First, that it has been one of the main ways misinformation has been spread about the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, how Facebook doesn't protect users' information at all. And lastly, about how Facebook causes mental health issues within its users. The first contention that I'll be presenting today is about the anti-vax movement for COVID-19. The claim is that the way that the anti-vax platform has been created, it is overrun by COVID vaccine lies. The warrants for this is, first, according to the Washington Post, people are more anti-vaccine if they get their news from Facebook than from Fox News. In the COVID States Project survey, they conducted and found a surprisingly strong relationship that if you rely on Facebook to get any sort of news and information about the coronavirus, you are substantially less likely than the average American to say you have been vaccinated. Second is that The Guardian explains that there has been a systematic failure with the vaccine misinformation that remains rampant on Facebook. Experts say that Facebook has repeatedly said it's going to take action, but in reality, we have seen piecemeal enforcement of its own community standards. The implications of this are critical. Facebook has prolonged any effort to stop COVID-19 from getting better. The continuation of Facebook's arguments online bring down vaccine efforts that are key to bringing us closer to herd immunity. The second contention is that it doesn't protect users on their platform. The claim is that every few weeks, a new story breaks out about some new corporate innovation in unauthorized sharing, selling, or losing control of America's data. The company will apologize and promise to always put the customer first, but no actual change will happen. This has happened numerous times for Facebook. The warrants for this is, first, according to NBC News, at the company, they have allowed partners to view supposedly private user data. Second is that BBC News explains that examples given have shown that Facebook has allowed others to view users' private messages and to see the names, contact details, and activities of their friends. Second is that The Atlantic explains that Mark Zuckerberg leveraged Facebook user data to fight rivals and help friends. The documents, which include emails, web chats, presentations, spreadsheets, and meeting summaries, show how Zuckerberg, along with his board and management team, found ways to tap Facebook's trove of user data, including information about friends, relationships, and photos, as leverage over companies it's partnered with. The implications of this is Facebook doesn't care for the privacy of others. It is putting people's personal information at risk in order to bolster their own company. Contention 3 is that Facebook destroys mental health. The claim of this is that Facebook causes depression. You want to stay healthy both emotionally and physically? Researchers from UC San Diego and Yale have some simple advice for you. Limit the amount of time you spend on Facebook. The warrants for this is, first, according to the mentalhealth.net, Facebook can cause depression if the user makes negative comparisons between himself or herself and others. Facebook predicts declines in subjective well-being, how people feel moment to moment, and how satisfied they are with their lives. Facebook can cause envy, which can lead to depression. And second is that researchers monitored through Insider that Facebook usage of 5,208 adults for 2 years found that Facebook's usage decreased subjects' physical and mental health. And lastly, The Guardian stated that Facebook admits that they ruin mental health, but claim that it's okay because of the other services they provide. The implications of this is Facebook hurts mental health of individuals because of the way it works. It targets individuals based on how they're feeling and leads to their mental health being worse. So, through all of these 3 key reasons, it is proven that Facebook does more harm than Twitter. And for all of these reasons, I urge you to vote for the affirmative in today's case. Thank you. I am open to 2 minutes of cross-examination.
Hey, Richa. Okay, great speech. I'll go ahead and start my timer. My first question is, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Okay, love to hear it. So what is Facebook doing right now to address this anti-vaccine movement?
So they've claimed to make a lot of modifications to try and take down anti-vax posts, but nothing actually has happened.
Okay, cool. When did the anti-vaxxer movement actually start?
We're gonna say that it happened quite a while ago with other diseases, but mainly we're focusing on what has happened with COVID-19.
Okay, so it started a really long time ago then. Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so kind of switching gears here. On the second contention, you say that Facebook is really bad when it comes to privacy, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So this thing has happened to me, and I'm wondering if it's happened to you too. Have you ever been just talking about a certain pair of shoes or a certain item that you want to buy, and then all of a sudden your Instagram starts advertising it to you?
More than I would like. This is happened to me.
I know, it's awful. It's atrocious. But I was just wondering, so that has happened to you in the past though? Yeah. Okay, cool. Couple other questions. On the third contention about mental health, why are people on Facebook in the first place?
There's a lot of reasons as to why people use Facebook. I can't say for certain why certain individuals use Facebook.
Okay, why are you on Facebook?
Debate.
So what does it do? What does Facebook allow you to do though, because of being on their platform?
I guess my purposes is to connect with other people, but that's not always what happens, or there can be like negative impacts from that.
For sure. Awesome. So I have that as the end of a cross-examination. So I'm going to go ahead and put 6 minutes on my timer. And this is going to be the negative speech. So first off, I would just like to thank you, Richard, for a great and educational debate. And to everyone watching, highly encourage you to join the team. Best decision of my college career. My name is Tristan Keen. I'm a second-year member of the team, and I am proud to negate the resolution today. To prove the resolution false, I have 2 contentions explaining why Twitter is necessarily worse than Facebook. My first contention is polarization. The claim here is that Twitter is a platform that incentivizes miscommunication while disincentivizing nuance, which is definitely not conducive to meaningful political discussions. The warrants are that according to the New York Times, social psychologists have long argued that positive, intimate contact between members of rival groups across an extended period can produce compromise. But that is definitely not what Twitter offers. Its character limits, combined with the chaotic and often anonymous nature of interactions on the platform, simply are just not conducive to mutual understanding. Second, Harvard explains that Twitter contributes to online extremism. Evidence from their empirical investigation indicated that users with extreme ideologies generally attracted a larger public audience than their moderate peers. Additionally, Twitter entrenches biases by only exposing users to content they agree with. I.e., if you like enough NRA tweets, it's not long before your entire feed is Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens. The implications are going to be polarization. When people are exposed only to information that confirms their own biases, they are a lot less likely to actively engage with opposing ideologies and are a lot more likely to double down on their own beliefs. But contention 2 is targeted harassment. The claim here is that targeted harassment proliferates on Twitter because of the way that the platform operates. It's no secret that Twitter has struggled to enforce its own community regulations. And the harassment that takes place there disproportionately targets women and minorities. A study conducted by Amnesty International and Troll Patrol found that a woman receives a problematic or abusive tweet every 30 seconds, and that women of color were 34% more likely to receive abusive tweets. In September, a BuzzFeed News survey of over 2,700 users found that 90% of respondents said that Twitter didn't do anything when they reported abuse. And that makes sense given the nearly 303 million tweets or more per day that the platform receives. The implications here are going to be super important. When we're talking about harms, we have to consider physical safety. Internet trolling, when allowed to operate unchecked, is detrimental not only to the victim's mental health, but to their physical safety as well. And if there's one thing that Twitter is famous for, it's for getting people doxxed and having their information released onto the internet, which definitely has direct implications on both their physical safety and their own well-being. But let's talk about some of my opponent's arguments in this debate. I'm just basically going to go top down and talk about why some of these arguments just don't make sense. First, on this idea about anti-vaxxers. I asked Richa and CrossX, how long has the anti-vax ideology been around? And she says for a pretty long time, and I'm going to agree with her there. People were angry about the measles and smallpox vaccines, which means that misinformation and anti-vax is probably inevitable, which means that it's definitely not Facebook's fault. But additionally, we're going to say that Facebook provides linked to information that contradicts what these anti-vaxxers are posting and has time and time again dedicated resources to combating this type of misinformation. But my third response here is going to be that when people believe wacky things, they will try to share that information no matter what, whether that means posting on Facebook or standing on a soapbox. We say that this kind of wacky beliefs and misinformation is probably inevitable, which means we can't just chalk it up to Facebook. But let's go to the second contention bred in this debate. My opponent tells you that information is being sold, but in CrossX admitted herself that we're probably all victims of this. And I'm sure we can all relate to the experience of going on our phone and finding that we have advertisements for something that we just talked about. Now, this happens on Instagram a lot, which means that it's probably true of every social media, and we can't necessarily peg down Facebook as being the worst. But additionally, as everyone under 25 with the Facebook can attest, the majority of our friends are relatives, which means that we definitely have to be the best, most polished versions of ourselves, which means if your info is going to be stolen anyways, why not make it flattering information, which is definitely not the information that's posted on Twitter. But on contention 3, I have a couple of responses here. My opponent says that Facebook is really, really bad for mental health and that people are going to make comparisons between themselves and others. But I tell you that eating disorders were an epidemic in the 90s, and this was pre-Facebook. Things like magazines, televisions, films, those all directly influence how we see ourselves, and we cannot attribute that solely to Facebook. But additionally, on this idea that Facebook writ large is really bad for mental health, I say that this is probably true of anybody who uses the internet. But additionally, this is going to be a really important argument, and this is something that goes conceded in CrossX. The sole purpose of Facebook as a platform is to connect people. If you have friends who live across the globe, guess what? You can now communicate with them instantly, which means that even if it is bad for mental health, the benefits definitely outweigh the harms. The ability to communicate with your community, and in our instance with the debate community, definitely provides us with a sense of connection that we can't get anywhere else, which means that while Facebook isn't that bad, Twitter definitely is. And you've already voted for the negative in this debate. And I move into my 2 minutes of cross-examination.
Tristan. Okay, 2 minutes. So my first question is, how are you doing today?
Oh my gosh. I'm doing great.
Big surprise there. Okay. So, in the status quo, is it safe to say that political polarization has been at an all-time high?
I'd say that's, probably because of Twitter.
Okay. And then you mentioned resources on the second contention that I read. How do people access these?
So through Facebook.
Like where in Facebook?
So like, for example, if you post like misinformation, Facebook has like dedicated, like, I think it's called like an info center or something where they have information about like the vaccine that kind of contradicts this anti-vaxxer sentiment.
Okay, awesome. And then you mentioned about how harassment is happening on Twitter. Are there any protocols to like protect people from this currently?
So we would say that because of the nature of how many people use Twitter every day, it's basically impossible to regulate, especially given how many people are anonymous. But additionally, even if there are protocols out there, they're probably insufficient in dealing with like what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm. And then so it's like safe to say that Twitter and like Facebook are not the only social media platform that gives people content based on their interests.
Yeah. I mean, I think specifically content based on your interest is something that's really bad on Twitter. And that's specific to kind of like content based on your politics. And I would say that the algorithm for Twitter is like a lot worse when it comes down to that.
Okay, awesome. That is time for me.
Awesome.
First off, I just want to thank Tristan for giving that amazing speech. I'm just going to go through all of Tristan's arguments and then through my own. First, on this idea of political polarization, I'm going to say that this isn't only in the world of Twitter. Look to what happened with anti-vaxxers in COVID. I'm going to argue that what's happening is because of political polarization, because people are being confirmed that the idea that vaccines are bad because of where they are standing politically. Second, we're going to say that this is not, they make arguments about how an echo chamber exists and how a lot of people are turning to extremism. We're going to say this is not only on Twitter, or rather not only in the world online. Look to events that have been happening in the status quo, storming the US Capitol. This is extremism. And then secondly, the echo chamber exists on Facebook too. If you look to our mental health arguments, it explains that this echo chamber has been created to hurt people's mental health, which is uniquely bad. Next, onto the contention 2 of targeted harassment. There's going to be a few answers on this. First, that restricted mode and safety mode exist on Twitter. Safety mode was introduced in September 1st in 2021 for the issue that is currently happening. Twitter recognizes what's happening. And also, along with this, restricted mode has been effective. It keeps people from seeing anything that is considered graphic or horrific that you need to turn on if you want to see it, which is uniquely beneficial. And Tristan makes arguments in cross-ex about how they aren't effective, but honestly, the fact that they are even existing in the first place is a benefit to Twitter, one that does not exist in the world of Facebook. Now onto my own case. Tristan makes argumentations about how misinformation is inevitable, but this simply isn't true at the point in time where there's statistical evidence coming from the COVID States Project that tells us that people who use Facebook are much less likely to get the vaccine, and that there's correlation between COVID-19 and what is currently happening on Facebook. The argument isn't just anti-vax in general, it's what's currently happening with COVID. Next, they make articulations about how there's links to inform that contradicts what anti-vaxxers are posting. But then they also say that when people believe wacky things, they will share that information. These two contradict each other. If people believe what they are posting, they're not going to be using the links that are there. Onto the second contention. They make a lot of arguments about how we're all victims to our information being spread, but uniquely with Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg is doing this, and he does not care that he is doing this. Facebook itself as an institution is bad because of the idea that a billionaire is literally selling the information to leverage themselves. There is no hacking involved. It is the company itself. And last, on mental health, we're going to say that the argument isn't social media can't be detrimental. It's rather Facebook algorithm specifically makes people depressed. Thank you.
All right, great job, great speech. I'll go ahead and put 5 minutes into my timer. All right, thanks again, Richard, for a great debate. Again, please join the team. Super fun, great decision. But let's talk about today's debate. The most important contention in today's debate is the contention about targeted harassment. I tell you a couple of things here. First, I tell you that Twitter is built in such a way that empowers online trolls, and these online trolls do a lot of damage, especially to people who are already marginalized. I read a couple warrants here. First is that Twitter receives millions of tweets each year. It's really, really hard to sift through those. Actually being able to take action on individual incidences of abuse and harm is basically like finding a needle in a haystack. But even if these platforms were smaller, Twitter would still struggle to discipline the perpetrators. I read you specifically the survey that out of the 2,700 users who have faced this kind of targeted harassment, almost 90% report Twitter literally doing nothing. Even when they do get discovered, claims get dismissed left and right. Compare that to the actual action that Facebook is taking on the issues that my opponent brings up. But even if none of that is true, Richard has conceded that way more people are anonymous on Twitter than on Facebook. That means that people are emboldened to engage in whatever kind of targeted harassment they want. There is a reason that people wear masks to rob convenience stores. It's to escape accountability. And this is what being anonymous online does. And additionally, because Twitter is kind of like the Wild West, all it takes is one person to sick their following on someone else to do irreparable harm to their mental and physical health. And that's always going to outweigh, because it's a question of physical safety. Those are the doxing arguments I make. But it also causes huge amounts of suffering. This kind of bullying necessarily isolates people and does huge amounts of harm to their mental health. And in a debate asking about harm, the real immediate and material harm of this kind of violence definitely means that Twitter is really, really bad. Let's talk about some of my opponent's answers on my contentions. First, we get this argument that there's this restricted in safety mode, but there's no indication as to why that actually prevents harassment. Maybe it prevents people from seeing graphic or horrific things, but that definitely doesn't exclude the actual things that people are targeting towards them. But additionally, we're going to say that there's no indication as to why these are actually successful in keeping people safe on the internet in the first place. I read you a bunch of really good reasons as to why Twitter algorithms are just necessarily bad, which means that we definitely don't give any weight to these responses. Let's go to my opponent's contentions. First, I make a really good response on this first contention. I tell you that misinformation is inevitable. People were angry about the measles vaccine. They were angry about the smallpox vaccine. And of course, they're angry about COVID too, which means that we cannot isolate Facebook as being the sole cause of that. My opponent gives you a warrant as to why people who use Facebook are less likely to get vaccinated, but we say that that's probably inevitable anyways. But let's go to the second warrant I give you here. I tell you that Facebook provides links to information that contradicts what anti-vaxxers are posting. But my opponent says that if people believe what they are posting, they won't click on the links. We say that Facebook, it makes it pretty obvious, this information, i.e. every time that you open Facebook, you're confronted with this information about why the vaccines are safe, why they have been tested. And when people are exposed to that kind of information, eventually they're going to change their minds. But if anything, it definitely breaks down this echo chamber effect where they don't just believe that anti-vaccines or anti-vaxxers are the only ones out here, which means that Facebook is definitely doing more than Twitter. But additionally, when people believe wacky things, they're going to share that information no matter what. And we cannot isolate Facebook as being the true cause of that. But on the second contention, my opponent says that Facebook sells your social media information. And I agree. But this is also true of literally every other social media. And I make this response telling you that if your information is going to be stolen anyways, why not make it flattering information and have your Facebook info be stolen besides your Twitter information? But on the third contention, my opponent says that Facebook is really bad for mental health. But I give you the most important response in this debate, that the entire reason that Facebook exists is to connect people with their communities. That's really, really important. And it's why me and Richa both are Facebook users. It connects us with the debate community, which is super duper important and is really good for our mental health. But additionally, I tell you that mental health was bad before Facebook and it'll be bad after. For all of these reasons, I strongly urge a negative ballot in this debate.
All right. First off, again, I just want to thank Tristan for that epic speech and urge everyone here to join the team. It's been a really great experience. Today, I urge you to vote for the affirmative for two main reasons. First, of how Facebook has dangerously been spreading people's private information around the world to leverage against other companies. And second, the idea that Twitter is trying to be better. First, let's focus on this first main argument. Facebook is bad and Twitter is bad, but the real question of today's debate is which one does more harm. And at the point in time where Mark Zuckerberg sells people's private information to leverage against other companies, there is no other reason to vote for the affirmative. The implication of this is that Facebook does not care about the users, even a little bit. The creators are willing to go to trial rather than to create protocols to protect their users and stop the continuous damage. Facebook spreads contacts, messages, private information to whoever they want, and there is nothing that can be done. But then on the second argument, Twitter is trying to take the necessary steps to try and improve the physical and verbal abuse that is happening. Restricted mode specifically is to prevent people from having graphic or images that they do not want to see or any sort of posts. And then second, especially the new form of safety mode was introduced for the reasons of harassment. And what's so important of this is the idea that Twitter is trying to make its platform better. Twitter is encouraging the idea that it can be a safe space, while Facebook as a company literally does not care. They're not willing to do anything to try and make things better. And it's not as simple as Tristan articulates about how, they're just using their information to give out what people want. No, they're selling it to other companies to leverage themselves. They're trying to bolster Facebook. And so when we look down to it at the end of the debate and try and decide if Facebook does more harm or Twitter does more harm, you have to look towards Facebook on the idea that it doesn't care about its users and it's willing to sell all of its personal information while Twitter is trying to help. And so for all of these reasons, I urge you to vote for the affirmative in today's debate. Thank you.
And thank you so much to you, Richa, and to Tristan, and especially Richa. We actually planned originally on having Richa in both of the debates tonight, but unfortunately her partner was unable to make it. So it was really good to see Richa and Tristan get to debate. They actually competed together last year, and one of the national championships they won was in the event we're about to do. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Villa, and I am the Director of Debate here at Diablo Valley College, which means if you didn't think we were all that hot, then, I'm probably the guy you got to come talk to, unless you think that I'm not that good, and then you got to talk to Sasan, because he was my coach back when I was a student at DVC. I joined the speech and debate team about 8 years ago when I was still an undergrad at DVC, and it transformed my life. It helped me earn scholarships to the University of the Pacific, where I earned both my bachelor's and master's degree, and then was very fortunately able to come back and get to work with wonderful students like some of the ones you are going to see tonight. I have the great pleasure of introducing our second debate tonight, which is in my personal favorite debate format, Parliamentary Debate, which is a 2-on-2 style of debate that focuses more on specific policy implementation, right? So instead of talking about things like Facebook versus Twitter in the abstract, we try and talk about hard policies or actual changes that a government might want to implement. And tonight, our topic will be that the United States federal government should change its energy policy to prioritize the adoption of nuclear energy. My first showcase debate was about 8 years ago with Syerson, and I am fortunate enough to have him again by my side competing with me. But we will be competing against two of our finest students. Once again, Tristan Keene, and if you could turn your camera on, Tristan, that would be awesome. Welcome back. Good to see you. I know it's a little bit of a break. Hopefully you got some water. And we will also be having Tristan's current debate partner, Brenna Syerson. Brenna is in her third year of concurrent enrollment at DVC. Her major's undeclared as far as I know right now. I know she's in the middle of applying to all the colleges, but she has had an incredibly successful time here at DVC, including winning a national championship of her own last year. And her and Tristan are off to a tremendous start this year, being one of the top 5 teams in the nation in parliamentary debate. And that is university and community college level. So we could not be more proud of all 3 of the folks who are here tonight. Syerson, if you want to turn on your camera, I think we're just about ready to go. So to clear up anything for you, as I said, we'll be debating the resolution about nuclear energy, which Tristan will be telling you more about in just a second. This will be a 2-on-2 debate with Tristan and Brenna competing against Syerson and myself. And we hope that you will really enjoy this debate. And afterwards, we'll have a brief few words from Blake one more time, and then we'll get you folks out of here. So we sincerely appreciate you sticking around for this, and we hope you will enjoy it just as much as we do. So without any further ado, the rest of us will turn off our cameras and we will give the floor to Ms. Tristan Keene.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for that, Paul. I'll go ahead and start my speech. The resolution today is that the United States federal government should change its energy policy to prioritize the adoption of nuclear energy. My partner and I affirm the resolution, meaning that we think nuclear is very, very cool. Let's talk about why that is. Advantage 1 is the environment. The claim is that nuclear is a necessary tool in the toolbox when it comes to addressing climate change. First, climate change is only getting worse than the status quo. We all experienced the catastrophic fire seasons of the past few years, the 90-degree Octobers, and most recently, the torrential downpours and flooding of last month. It's not just California that's suffering, it's the world. Global temperatures are rising, and it's pretty easy to see why that is. Fossil fuels are bad, like really bad. They release huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, which remain there for years, trapping heat all the while. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the burning of fossil fuels was responsible for 76% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions in 2019. And not to be a doomer, but the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change makes it clear in their latest reports that in order to prevent the worst effects of climate change from becoming inevitable, we need to make immediate and large-scale shifts in energy production. Luckily for all of us, nuclear power is able to help us mitigate this issue. It solves in a couple ways. First, nuclear doesn't release nearly as much carbon as fossil fuel plants. In fact, nuclear only produces about 4 to 5% as much carbon. Additionally, nuclear has prevented almost 528 million metric tons of carbon emissions from entering the atmosphere thus far, according to the EPA. And the IPCC has found that in every single simulation of a situation in which climate change was mitigated before the 2-degree brink, an increase in the production of the nuclear sector was necessary to achieve the desired goal. Let's talk about the implications here, because they're really, really important. First is climate change. It's the most existential threat facing us today and will affect everybody on the planet, including everyone watching these debates today. But the second implication is going to be climate refugees. If we don't do anything to mitigate climate change now, the World Bank explains that by 2050, upwards of 216 million people could be displaced by natural disasters. And in case you're like an econ major and death and suffering isn't enough to convince you that climate change matters, it would also be really bad for the economy. The New York Times in July of this year notes that climate change could cut the world economy by up to $23 trillion, effectively erasing 11 to 14% of global economic output. That's devastating. But the second advantage is going to be jobs. The claim here is that nuclear as an industry employs large amounts of workers. We are losing jobs and energy fields right now. According to the Wall Street Journal, wind and solar farms require few workers, and the closure of nuclear plants means that many people are losing their jobs. According to the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, jobs are being lost in rural communities, which are already underserved. But luckily, nuclear creates jobs. According to a report published by the World Nuclear Association, nuclear energy creates 25% more jobs per hour of energy than any other energy source. Additionally, it requires 9,000 armed guards, which further increases employment. Our plan would increase the number of plants and therefore the number of people in rural areas employed, which means property values increase in the area, as well as increasing business and reviving the economy. Not only this, but these jobs are really good jobs. Let's talk about why. Nuclear plants run for upwards of 80 years. That means that the jobs created now definitely benefit the communities, not just in the present, but long into the future as well. On top of that, for every 100 jobs created by the nuclear sector, another 66 jobs are created in local communities that surround them. And lastly, the average nuclear worker's salary is 50% higher than literally any other energy worker. They're going to try to come up and say that renewables are really good, but let's be real. Would you rather make $15 an hour or $22.50 an hour? Personally, I'd choose $22. But let's go to the implications here. We say that absent the plan, you definitely lead to poverty. Poverty is necessarily violent. It forces people to choose between their basic needs. And it's definitely worse in rural communities where access to resources is basically non-existent. There's a 10 to 15 year life expectancy differential between the richest and poorest people in this country, indicating that poverty is deadly. But it's also cyclical, meaning that when we create jobs, we aren't just saving individuals, we're saving entire generations of families. In rural economies where jobs are scarce, the nuclear industry is a lifeline that connects individuals to high-paying long-term jobs. And the impacts of that just can't be understated. Therefore, I strongly urge an affirmative ballot in this debate.
All right. Tristan and Brenna, are you ready for us to ask you some questions about your case?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, the first question is how you two are doing, because I didn't hear from Brenna earlier.
I'm doing great.
Great. Okay. I have some questions about this nuclear plan that you have. The first question is, what are you going to do with all the nuclear waste from it?
Well, what's being done with it right now? Being stored.
Where?
In nuclear waste facilities.
Okay. Not super specific, but that's okay. Did you say that nuclear plants release carbon?
So I say that they prevent carbon from being released into the atmosphere.
But you said a thing about how it only releases 5% of the carbon, right?
Yeah, so that's like the total process of producing that energy. Releases.
So it still 5%. Releases carbon.
The process of building the plants and producing the energy produces some amount of carbon, but compared to the status quo, it's virtually nothing.
Okay. I have another question. You mentioned that there's going to be 9,000 armed guards. Why do we need 9,000 armed guards?
Because we take the security of these nuclear plants seriously.
What could happen, for instance, that we want to avoid?
I don't know, but nothing when the armed guards are there.
9,000 guards, just in case. There's nothing specific that could go wrong.
It's because we have the guards. We're not going to see anything bad happening.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned, is what you're defending that the method of energy production that like creates the most jobs is the best one?
We just say that nuclear as an industry is like the most desirable, and jobs is like one factor of that, and the climate change is another.
So I don't think this is what Paul is about to talk about, but hypothetically, right? If we were like, let's make everyone run on hamster wheels and pay them, and that would be better because it creates the most jobs.
I mean, I don't think running on hamster wheels creates emissions, so sure.
Cool.
Okay, well, that was a wonderful cross-examination. My job here is going to be the negative first speaker, and so my job will be to respond to some of the things that were said and establish arguments for me and Sasan. Unfortunately, rather, they won't mostly be about hamsters, so if everyone is ready, I will begin. While I appreciate many of the arguments that my opponent is making, and especially the severity and the very real risk of climate change, it is indeed my job to negate this resolution, and so I will offer 3 positions from me and Sasan. The first one is disaster/accidents. The thesis of this argument is that nuclear energy poses a significant risk of disaster that our current energy policy avoids. Let's go to some warrants. The ace of point is natural disasters. Gregory Jaczko, the former commissioner and chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 2019, notes that the accident at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant cost as much as $400 billion in damages, and that during his time on the NRC, his staff found weaknesses in the programs of US nuclear plants for dealing with fires, earthquakes, and flooding, the exact kinds of natural disasters that could trigger a Fukushima-like catastrophe. My second warrant is I also watched the hit HBO series Chernobyl last year, and straight up no one in that miniseries seemed like they were having a good time, so I kind of don't trust nuclear energy. The BISA point is terrorism. Our first argument in our first warrant is from Ali Adami of the Journal of Political Studies of the Islamic World. In 2021, they noted that the expansion of nuclear power plants comes with a significant risk of nuclear material being obtained and used by terrorist organizations for the purpose of producing radiological weapons such as a dirty bomb, or in the worst case, a nuclear weapon. Which brings us to the implication. Our implication is that the significant risks posed by both natural disasters and terrorist organizations surrounding nuclear energy are far too threatening to risk. No one has ever heard of an earthquake near a wind farm causing millions of people in a 100-mile radius to be evacuated, or terrorists trying to steal solar cells so that they can build a death ray or something. These threats only exist regarding nuclear energy. Which brings us to our second disadvantage, trading off with renewables. Thesis. Nuclear energy directly trades off with the deployment of renewable energy sources such as solar and wind. Warrants. 1. Jonathan Porritt of the United Kingdom Sustainable Development Commission stated in a report on nuclear energy from 2012 that the scale of political and financial investment required for mass adoption of nuclear energy will crowd out renewables and draw investment away from competing alternatives like solar and wind. He also notes that the massive timescale for bringing nuclear power online is drastically longer than implementing a similar level of renewable infrastructure. Which brings us to the implication. If you believe that solar and wind are a core part of an effective strategy to combat climate change, then you believe adopting nuclear is a mistake. If you ever want to be really bummed out, go ahead and read a report from the United Nations Climate Change Panel and realize that every single one says we have until like 2030 to get our lives together, and nuclear power plants take time to build. Rushing them rarely works out. Again, I have seen Chernobyl. Which brings us to our third disad of uranium. Thesis. Widespread adoption of nuclear energy necessitates the extraction of uranium, which causes significant environmental harm. Warrants. Laurel Morales of NPR in 2017 notes that the United States mining industry has historically exploited native lands for the sake of uranium extraction. A disorder referred to as Navajo neuropathy is linked to uranium contamination and leads to death from liver disease, kidney disease, and drastically higher rates of cancer. Which brings us to our implication. Uranium is literally poison that we pull from like the same place the Balrog from Lord of the Rings lived, and every mining operation, uranium or otherwise, poses a major risk of runoff. But in the case of coal, the water just gets dirty and crops get dusty, whereas in the case of uranium, fish start trying to like walk on land and your corn on the cob glows in the dark. At a minimum, no one ever had to come up with a name for an entirely new disease that exclusively kills Native Americans because of solar or wind. And now that we've made our arguments, I want to take some time to respond to the things that the affirmative said proper. So let's begin on advantage 1. Starting with climate change. They say that climate change is an existential threat and that nuclear is key to solving. And we have a few responses. First, a report for the European Union found that planning to operation time of nuclear plants for all of them ever built in history required on average 10 to 19 years. Secondly, the construction of nuclear power plants actually increases emissions. The same reports find that there's no such thing as a zero emission or close to zero emission nuclear power plant as a result of their construction requiring tons of cement and the requirement for ongoing uranium extraction. What does this add up to? Well, since the early 2000s, China has massively ramped up nuclear production and is expected to decrease emissions by 3% annually. Except between 2016 and 2017, they actually saw a 1.3% increase in emissions. This resulting difference, if it had been replaced by wind or solar, would have saved as many as 69,000 lives per year from air pollution. Which brings us to their second advantage about jobs. The affirmative asks a very important question. Would you rather make $22 per hour at a nuclear power plant or $15 at a solar or wind operation? And I have an answer. Whichever one's employees don't have 3 times the risk of cancer and doesn't rely on the exploitation of indigenous people's lands, both in the United States and abroad. And for our final point, we actually totally agree with the AF when it comes to jobs. In fact, we think it creates way more jobs than them. Because not only will the plan necessitate the massive expansion of uranium mining, it will also create thousands of jobs moving the nuclear waste their plans create and trying to figure out how to safely store something that stays radioactive for literally 1,000,000 years. I hope all of you have updated your resumes because apparently there's going to be a lot of openings for security guards as well. And that's all I have for the negative case, and I'm ready for cross-examination.
All right, awesome. Great speech, Paul. I have a few questions though. So I'm going to go ahead and start my timer for 2 minutes. My first question is that in the entirety of history, how many nuclear accidents have occurred?
Well, number 1, I'm doing great. But number 2, that's fine. But number 2 is there have been no less than 5 nuclear accidents that were on a major level, including things like Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, so on and so forth.
I also want to point out that you're talking about the entirety of history, but nuclear power plants have existed for like 50, 60 years.
Since 1954.
Sure. So I'm sure that includes these last 50 years though.
Yeah, one every 10 years is about the average then.
Sure, yeah.
Cool. I have a question. How is Sasan doing today?
I'm okay.
Okay, yeah, glad to hear it.
You're doing great.
All right. How many people have died as a result of these 5 nuclear accidents?
Hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands. Okay.
Yes.
Got it. All right. Is the sun always shining?
Yes.
Definitely not.
Definitely not. Okay.
I mean, do you mean like on like a space level or do you mean like in one place?
Always.
Maybe at DVC is like the sun always shining.
I like to think so because of our wonderful education programs. But literally, no. Sometimes it's night, sometimes it's cloudy.
So true. Is the wind always blowing?
I hope not.
I hope not too. We are in the Bay Area though, so you never know.
Yeah.
All right. And my final question is, have you ever been through like a TSA line?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Have you ever like accidentally brought like shampoo or something in your bag?
Yes.
Many times.
How have they reacted?
They haven't even noticed. I had like cologne that was over the limit and they didn't even check it. I could have killed everyone on the plane.
Yeah, exactly.
No, they noticed for me. They were like, don't you know you can't do this? And I said, I forgot. And then they put it in the trash can next to them because it was potentially dangerous.
All right, great for it. Thanks, guys. We'll go ahead and start our next speech now.
Okay, awesome. Oops, sorry, bit of an echo there. Okay. I'm going to start my speech now. Thank you so much for a great speech, Paul. My name is Brenna. I am a 3rd year on the team and I have loved all 3 years. So I am super excited to be in this debate today. First, let's take a look at some of Paul's arguments. First, he makes some references to Fukushima and how nuclear energy led to some pretty bad natural disasters. But let me put it this way. If we keep treating the Earth the way we are now with our abundance of emissions from fossil fueling, we are going to see Fukushima times 10. Mother Earth is a girl boss, and she doesn't take disrespect lightly. That means that all of the impacts of Fukushima are happening in the status quo, but way, way worse, and nuclear is the only way to solve. Second, they say that terrorists are going to steal uranium. Let's think about this for like 1 second. In the negatives fantasy land, terrorists are smart enough to successfully steal from one of the most heavily guarded places, remember, 9,000 armed guards, on the planet, and then literally pull a Tony Stark and make a nuclear weapon using spare parts in a cave with no running water. But they're also so dumb that rather than make a nuclear weapon in their own country, they're going to fly to the country with the strictest airport security in the world, steal the necessary materials for their extinction-causing weapon, then go back through the airport with uranium. TSA stole my sunscreen. Do you really think they're going to let terrorists take one of the most poisonous materials on Earth, then sit on a flight for 12 hours with said radioactive material right next to their complimentary plain peanuts while they watch Godzilla versus King Kong? I don't think so. Next, they say renewables are good. We say renewables suck. When the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, which is like half the time, renewable energy doesn't work. Imagine if the gas you put in your car only worked when the weather was awesome. Except it wasn't your car, it was your grandmother's dialysis machine, and you lived in Mississippi. Which, fun fact, is the second rainiest state and gets the 5th least wind. The more you know. They say uranium mining is bad. And that might be true, but it's a good thing we have more than enough uranium to fuel the entire country for the next hundreds of years. And if people are smart enough to get over 3.4 ounces of uranium past TSA, we can definitely figure out how to mine safely in the next 100 years. Plus, climate change is also like Balrog from Lord of the Rings, but global. Now that we've talked about the negative side, let's talk about our case and why it's so important. First, Tristan tells you that right now, we are facing the existential threat of climate change. Even if everything that could go wrong with nuclear does go wrong, it still doesn't compare to what's going to happen from climate change. They say that nuclear can't solve because it takes too long to build the plants. But there are actually 253 nuclear plants that are either already in operation or almost done being built in the status quo. Due to fears surrounding nuclear power, like the fears of Paul and Sasan, many of those plants never operated in the first place. That means that we do not have to build one more nuclear plant to mitigate the worst effects of the status quo. Plus, the Wall Street Journal tells us that renewables are even slower, with countries like Germany, who have hugely ambitious plans for solar, have not been able to make any meaningful dent in emissions. So if nuclear is slow, renewable is way slower. What's not slow is climate change and the fact that it's going to kill us all. Additionally, with all of the energy jobs being lost right now, people are suffering economically. They say that the jobs we create are going to be really dangerous, but let's clear up this discussion. According to the Canadian Nuclear Association, there is virtually zero risk of radiation, groundwater contamination, or worker exposure through advanced detection and ventilation technology that protects workers. They say lower paying solar jobs are better, which might be true if those solar jobs existed in the first place. The sun doesn't need a minimum wage worker to tell it to shine, so that means it's nuke or nothing. So basically, the status quo is just like Chernobyl, but worse. As in, everyone's going to die because of an existential threat, but also with student loan debts that you can't pay off because you're an unemployed music major. That's the future of the status quo. But with nuclear power, we can all be bassoon performance majors and still be employed. So at the end of the day, the negative makes a lot of really good arguments about why nuclear is bad and renewable is better. But that's just not what the empirics say. Nuclear is necessarily going to solve for the worst thing in today's debate, climate change. And renewables are not going to be able to. So at the end of the day, whatever your major is, it's obvious that nuclear energy is a net good for the United States and a net good for Mother Earth overall. We're open for some more cross-X.
All right. Hey, thanks for that speech. I think everybody knows how everybody's doing, so I'm just going to go straight into a question. Do either of you know where you're going to be going to school next year?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. And that's also true for Brenna?
Yep, not yet, unfortunately.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, Sasan?
Go ahead, please.
So if the Canadian Nuclear Association is right, and there's no like risk of poisoning from uranium extraction or whatever, why do the Navajos keep giving themselves radiation poisoning?
So we say that uranium mining has led to some bad things in the past, but we have really advanced tech right now that can lead to mining safely. And additionally, we don't even need to do this mining or disposal in the first place because we have enough nuclear plants and nuclear energy to last the US for hundreds of years. So it might be true that there have been some really bad impacts in the past, but those impacts we're not at risk of those impacts anymore.
We have enough uranium to last us for hundreds of years.
Mhm.
Okay. I have a question. You mentioned like Mississippi and it not getting rain and stuff like that. Say we were going to build some new nuclear power plants, right? Where do you think we should build them?
I guess we aren't experts on, location of nuclear power plants, but in the status quo, they're mostly being built in rural areas because nuclear plants are pretty big, and I don't think we can build them in the middle of San Francisco.
Okay, Paul, you got any other questions? I'm ready to go.
Yeah, my last question is just, you said that we have enough uranium to last 100 years, maybe more than 100 years, and that we'll find a solution to safely do it in that time, the mining. Why haven't we developed that in the last 68 years that we've been extracting uranium?
We would say that we have. That's the arguments that Brenna gives about this advanced technology that allows us to mine safely and prevent workers from being exposed.
And additionally, a lot of advancements in nuclear haven't been made because of fears.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And Sasan, ready whenever you are.
Yeah, I'm ready. As we've mentioned, folks, I'm Sasan. I used to compete on this speech and debate team. It's not often that I get to debate on behalf of DVC anymore, so this is an awesome opportunity. And one of the great privileges of my nearly 10 years of working at the school has been seeing Paul go from a competitor to a wonderful professor, and seeing Brenna and Tristan grow into fantastic debaters. But anyway, here is why you should lose. So at the end of the day, here is what really matters. One impact, right? There's all sorts of stuff that we're talking about. The jobs will do this thing, the jobs will do that thing. Maybe renewables, sometimes it's cloudy, but at the end of the day, what's going to matter the most is what is going to risk mass death. And so that's what I'm going to focus my speech on. And if at the end of this speech and at the end of Paul's speech following this, you believe that that threat for a mass catastrophe is significant, you're going to vote for us. So let's get into some of their arguments first, just to make sure that we've responded to everything at least a little bit. They talk about climate in their first advantage. One of the things that they say about the climate is that a lot of really bad things are going to happen to our environment. Probably a reason why just putting concrete in the ground somewhere and deciding that the nuclear waste you put in there is going to be safe for 1 million years is a little bit short-sighted, right? Keep in mind, Tristan and Brenna don't know what they're studying in school or where they're studying next year. But we're supposed to like take it on faith that they've thought 1 million years into the future and thought about all of the contingencies of what could go wrong. The next argument is the jobs, but we all agree that jobs and economy don't matter if we're dying en masse. So let's get onto that argument, which is a lot of the arguments that Paul really nicely laid out for us. I'm going to just reframe them with a couple ways of summarizing our points. So I'm going to show you why the risk of death is significant, why the percentage chance that we've been talking about is high. I'm going to tell you why the time scale that we're talking about is way longer than anything that the affirmative could possibly account for. And I'm going to show you that the people and the ways in which they will be affected by this are the most significant thing that we could be talking about. But first, let's talk about the risk of death. One of the things that the affirmative side has been saying and is going to keep saying is that there's a small risk, that the Canadian agency says that there's a low risk of something bad happening. So here is a famous thought experiment that I'm going to present to you. Imagine that I have a small bowl of M&Ms, like about this large, right? And I tell you that you got to eat an M&M. I offer the M&Ms to you. And I tell you, hey, there's one M&M in here that is poisoned. And if you eat it, you will instantly die. Ask yourself whether you would take that risk. And now consider that, and I looked this up, in a bowl this large, that would be about 1,000 M&Ms. So if you're saying, no, I wouldn't eat one of the M&Ms, then you are saying that a 0.1% risk of death when you don't have to do anything is too high. I would agree with you, except that the risk is way higher than 0.1%. These 9,000 armed guards aren't just there for exercise. They're there because there's things that can seriously go wrong. And yeah, maybe people aren't going to take uranium back on a flight with them, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a serious threat to our energy infrastructure, or else we wouldn't need 9,000 armed guards. Next, let's talk about this 1 million years thing, because I don't think that's been expanded enough or focused on enough in this debate. So I looked some things up for the sake of providing a sense of scale for 1 million years. I looked up when the Flintstones is set. I don't know if kids know what the Flintstones is anymore. They're the cereal stuff, and they also have vitamins. The Flintstones is set 10,000 years ago. Now, it didn't actually happen, so here's some actual things that happened. Stonehenge was built 5,000 years ago. I also looked this up, the Jetsons, that was kind of like the space Flintstones. That is set in 2067. That's like coming up. And we are talking about preparing for things that are going to happen, going to be dangerous in 1 million years. Paul didn't get a chance to go into this, but one of the problems we've had with our nuclear waste disposal is we can't even write warnings on the waste facilities. Like, say somebody digs it up or it gets unearthed in 900,000 years. We can't write warnings on them because English will not exist in that long. The languages that we speak can't survive that long. We can't just suppose that these things will be safe and nothing will go wrong. Now let's talk about what would go wrong. What would go wrong if a little bit of nuclear waste got out, right? Well, the problem with nuclear technology, unlike the sun, which is dangerous in some ways, and unlike wind, which is dangerous in some ways, is being exposed to nuclear radiation, even if it's 500,000 years old from a nuclear waste facility, will make your body boil at room temperature and melt you and everything in your vicinity. And they're not going to build these power plants in San Francisco, right? They are going to build them where indigenous people and indigenous communities live, where people in poverty live, right? Where the people who are already most subjected to the worst things are in our society will now have to live next to a nuclear power plant that could have something go wrong with it, as Tristan pointed out, once every 10 years on average, because of 5 accidents in the last 50 years. Look, on the scale that we are talking about of 1 million years, it doesn't matter how low a percentage chance of something going wrong is. After a long enough time, it will be inevitable that that thing is going to happen. We say, just stick with the wind and stick with the sun, and that sometimes it's cloudy is not a good enough reason to risk the lives of millions of people. I'm going to turn it over to Paul to close out our side of the debate.
Thanks so much, Sasan. Let me talk about this warning Sasan was discussing, right? About this problem of trying to protect those in the future. In 1992, the United States Department of Energy hired Sandia National Laboratories to come up with a plan surrounding nuclear waste. And the challenge was simple. In 10,000 years, for all we know, most languages might not exist. Technology could have fundamentally changed or been eliminated, and despite this, we would somehow need to communicate to humans of the future that they had stumbled upon a nuclear waste site that, if unearthed, would surely kill them and anyone else in the vicinity, including the wildlife. With millions of dollars in investment, The best solution that they came up with was blanketing the area with granite spikes that looked really scary, and then putting up signs with lightning bolts and spooky faces, and then writing the following warning word for word all over the area in every possible language. And the warning said this: "This place is not a place of honor. No highly esteemed deed is commemorated here. Nothing valued is here. This place is a message and part of a system of messages. Pay attention to it. Sending this message was important to us. We considered ourselves to be a powerful culture." Now, let me ask you the most important question in this debate. If you were playing Dungeons and Dragons with your friends, and you found a box in the middle of the Forbidden Forest, and it said that, would you open it? Because if the answer is yes, then you understand why even if nuclear power plants don't blow up, even if terrorists don't get nuclear material, even if solar and wind can still exist, and even if there is a safe way to mine literal radioactive poison, the waste from widespread adoption of nuclear energy will last for millions of years and risk killing untold millions of people long after all of us are gone. If you and your party would open the box, then you vote negative to make sure we never have to solve that problem to begin with, and to make sure we never stick our hand into that bowl of M&Ms. I started this debate by telling you climate change matters, and it absolutely does. And fortunately for us, there are other solutions like wind and solar, which means if there is a different solution, which potentially doesn't work as well, and which guarantees we have to solve a 1,000,000-year problem like the cursed trove of some space pirate or whatever, to save everyone on Earth from dying from radiation and boiling at room temperature, you have to vote negative. Thanks. Which brings us to our final cross-examination.
Hi. Oh my God, echo again. Sorry about that. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so Sasan, what happens if I don't eat your M&Ms?
What happens if you don't eat the M&Ms? Then in this analogy, we sometimes have a cloudy day, but otherwise use solar power.
Okay, so you don't like kill me and the rest of my family and the whole world and make us go extinct?
No.
Okay. So a little different from reality.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So sounds nice.
Yeah.
It's a nice guy.
So how long until climate change kills us?
Until it kills
About
us?
as long as it takes to build a nuclear power plant.
So less than 1,000,000 years?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what you mean. Like climate change will cause a lot of damage, right? But Antarctica will warm up, right? There's still ways that we can adapt to climate change. I hope we don't have to. Not much you can do about nuclear fallout.
Cool. And I have one last question. What's 1 divided by 1,000 in decimals?
0.001?
There you go.
Yeah, right?
Cool. Thank you.
There you go.
All right, cool. So it's now my final speech. I'm just going to grab a timer really quick. And I'm going to give this final speech the only order I know how, analogy by analogy. First off, I'd like to extend thanks to everybody for being here today. What a great debate night. So fun. Starting with this Chernobyl. I, for one, didn't like the Chernobyl miniseries. It was boring and slow and really gray, like almost too gray. But I have seen Planet Earth. It's colorful, it's really pretty, and it has this great British narrator. And oh man, after watching it, did I realize one thing, and it's that climate change is actually pretty serious, like existential level serious. Have you even seen the polar bears in the Arctic? They are literally skeletal. And making it even worse is the fact that this is all preventable. In my first speech, I came up and I gave you a bunch of great warrants. First, that climate change is happening now, and we're all experiencing its effects. Second, that fossil fuels are to blame because they trap carbon in our atmosphere, which only increases heat, which is really bad for those polar bears, but really pretty bad for us too. But additionally, and most importantly, is nuclear solves because it's carbon neutral. Let's go to the salad bowl analogy now. Sasan says that nuclear is a salad bowl of M&Ms. If even one is poisonous, then we don't eat any of them. The first problem here is that he's probably underestimating our love for M&Ms. And the second is that this analogy makes literally no sense. Climate change is an existential threat, one that can only be mitigated by the widespread adoption of nuclear technology. The better analogy is like if you had a gun to your head and were told to eat an M&M from the salad bowl, but you refuse to do it because it has like a 0.001% chance of making your stomach hurt. It doesn't make any sense. Save yourself, eat the M&M. We'll worry about our tummies later. And additionally, Brenna does a really good job of explaining why nuclear is one of the safest technologies out there. Those are the warrants from the Canadian Nuclear Association. This is due to advanced technology that allows us to identify threats and prevent a single worker from being exposed. But even if you don't buy that, mitigating climate change in the short term buys us the time that we need to make the tech better. But additionally, going down to this idea of nuclear terrorism. First of all, 9,000 armed guards is a lot. It's going to be really hard to get past them. But you know what's going to be a lot harder? Is building a nuclear bomb, taking it through TSA with you to your country and somehow turning that into something that can kill millions of people. That's going to be pretty difficult, and it's probably impossible for a lot of people. But additionally, they go really hard for this idea that people 100,000 years in the future aren't going to know if the site of their civilizations are nuclear power plants. First, it's going to be that these people literally don't exist in a world where we don't solve climate change, because, you know, the planet won't even be habitable. But second, I'm going to assume that people in the future are probably pretty smart. From what I've seen in movies and television, they seem like they've got a lot going for them. But third is that even if all of this is true and millions of future people die because of our nuclear waste repositories, it kind of sounds like that's a them problem. I don't know anybody who lives 100,000 years in the future, which means that climate change and solving for it right now is the most important impact in this round. And nuclear is the only thing that can solve, which means that you definitely vote for the affirmative in this debate. And thanks for a great debate, y'all. And join the team.
Thank you for a great debate, Tristan and Brenna and Sasan and Paul, but mostly Tristan and Brenna, since you two are members of the team and gave up your evening to come here and debate for everyone. Thanks so much for all of your work tonight. Folks, if you are watching this, please comment in the chat on YouTube who you think won tonight's debate. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what we think, it matters what you think. So before you log off for the night, make sure that you comment in the chat on YouTube who you think won tonight's debate. This live stream is going to be viewable after this is over. So any of you that want to go back and rehash any arguments, as I'm sure many of you are eager to rewatch this whole debate, that is available for you. Or if you joined us late, you can go back and see the start. But I just want to take one last opportunity to remind you all that we are accepting members of the team at all times, no matter what your skill level is. In fact, I like to joke that most people on the speech and debate team aren't very good at speaking or debating, because they're all people that are just trying to get better at those things. So whether your goal is to be a national champion, like some of the people you saw here tonight, or it's just to build a little bit more confidence with public speaking and with debating, there's a spot for you on the speech and debate team, and we hope that you will join us in the spring. The way you do that is by registering for Communications 163 Forensics. Remember, forensics is just a fancy word for speech and debate. So Communications 163 Forensics, make sure that you get that registration in before the spring, because we'd love for you to come and join the team and get out to some tournaments in the spring. If there's any of our competition watching this live stream tonight, I also want you to know that we're going to win a national championship this year, and we want everybody else that's watching this to come and be a part of that journey. So join us in the spring, be a part of the team, and hopefully you can make it to the state and nationals team, where we think we have a shot at a national championship this year, and we'd love for you all to be a part of it. That's it for me, folks. I will be sending out the list of Eventbrite attendees to all of the faculty for the DVC Communication Studies Department and anybody else that I invited to this tournament or to this event. And each of those professors may have different requirements for you. If you are in my class, if you're attending this from one of my classes, I'll be asking you to let me know something you learned here tonight. So think about that and come to class next week prepared to speak on that. That's it for us, folks. COM 163, forensics. Register for it for the spring. Otherwise, have a good night. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for supporting the DVC speech and debate team, and we hope to see you around.